Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome.
Hello.
Hi. Oh, Nikki, hi. I'll just keep admitting people here.
Hey, Angie, I'm on a cell phone, so sorry about that.
We don't get to see your face today, it sounds like.
You got lucky.
Hey, Nikki, I'm realizing we're I don't know if you're probably aware, we're overlapping with the National Adaptation Forum tribal session right now, which probably isn't great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is the only time I've been trying to make the past meetings for this one, but
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad you're here. I did get a few people who let me know they couldn't make it, including Shasta, who's actually got a conflict presenting. Hi, everybody. All right. Get us back to the beginning here. So meeting 6, I think a few more people will join us, but maybe some people decided not to because this is going to be a thinker of a meeting. So I think we might have a few new people, but let me do our little quickie overview of what we're here to do together. But I do want to say just thanks for being here. As we have been doing now for 5 meetings before this, our work together on this work group is to connect national health and climate data experts and invite us all to exchange knowledge on priority tribal adaptation and resilience data needs, sharing tools, practices, ideas, and lessons from the field, and exploring opportunities to develop and scale up solutions to address those needs. So I think we've been doing a really good job. So most of the meetings that we've had so far, we've talked through some solutions. We're getting a sense for how well tribes are being served by different types of tools, and how good the data access really is. And so we have some folks lined up to speak at future meetings. Noah and actually folks from Cal Enviro Screen, and it's gonna be great. We're gonna take a pause here because I feel like we've learned enough to maybe start getting some thoughts down about what we know about gaps, because I think that's like the fulcrum of what we're talking about, is like, where does the information not exist, or if it exists, where along the spectrum of readiness for tribes is it? So maybe, there might be information, like I was just tinkering around with some information available through the UN, but it's only available at a national scale. So is that really going to help this little tribe in Northern California understand its food security issues? Well, maybe not. So we'll talk through all of that, but let's do a quick introduction. So I want to make sure. So what we usually do is have everybody introduce themselves over chat if you've been here before. And if you haven't been here before, I want to invite you to introduce yourself out loud. And I'll just start. I have been here, but I'm Angie Hacker with the Tribal Climate Health Project, and we have BIA funds to help us administer this group. And we're so fortunate to have you all here. So I see Zoe. I think you might be new.
Hi, yeah, I'm Zoe. I'm a second-year master's student in environmental health sciences
hear, I don't know if anybody else is having trouble, but I can't hear you. You're very quiet.
Headphones. How about now? Okay, great. My name is Zoe. I'm a second-year Master of Public Health student at UC Berkeley and also a graduate student assistant at OEHA, so the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment for the Cal EPA. I'm doing a capstone project on water access and quality on reservation lands in California, just trying to do a call to action for our state water board and for OEHA to get this data sharing and building community going. So really happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. I'll be interested to learn more about your work. I think Lori is also new. Not Lori Montserrat, but Lori Carey Cathera.
Yes, you said it perfectly. No one ever says my name correctly.
I never say anything well.
Well, hey, Angie, it's nice to meet you and everyone. As Angie said, my name is Lori Carey Cathera. I'm with NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. I'm located in Charleston, South Carolina. Just really interested in learning more about tribes and how we can help them. Part of my job is I coordinate and oversee the Digital Coast Initiative for our office. And so it's a platform that provides coastal data and tools to folks, and we're interested in figuring out how we could make those resources more applicable to tribes and make them aware of the data and information that's available. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Lori. I think we have you plugged in to speak next month, right?
That's right.
Awesome. Okay. Nikki, I think you were here on the first one, but why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, Nikki Cooley. I'm from the Navajo Nation, and I'm the program. No, I am one of the co-managers of ITEP's Tribes and Climate Change program, and I introduced myself in the chat box too.
Oh,
thank you.
All right. Well, a good group, and I have heard from a couple others that say they might. I know that Claudia from CDC says she can join, but join late, and Walker Whelan from Cal EPA, the Cal Enviro Screen Tool. He said he can come late also, but let's dive in. Okay, so it's kind of a truncated meeting, and for those that are new, it's different than they have been. But what we usually do is some member announcements, and this just gives us a chance to share information about anything that's relevant to tribes and accessing climate impact, exposure, resilience, adaptation level data. And so I want to leave the floor open. I have just a couple of maybe questions actually to see who knows what, but anybody have anything to share, anything that's happening in your realm? Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
Great, thanks, Angie. Hi, everyone. So great to be back. So I work in the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research. We're developing what we're now calling the Vulnerable Communities Platform. We're really early in our process, but we're hosting specific listening sessions this month in collaboration with the California Strategic Growth Council. We have one focused on rural communities and one focused on tribal communities. So we would really appreciate it if, folks would distribute through your networks or show up. These are really early on in the process, very key to help us inform these equity-centered efforts and really get some more clarity on, data gaps and what are the linkages and what should be eligible activities, those kinds of things. Really appreciate it. I'll drop the info in the chat. Thanks.
My name is Lisa. I have a listening session fog. There's so many. Is this connected to, this isn't connected to the Regional Climate Collaborative's listening session?
Yeah, we've actually partnered with them because the timing and the scope seem to make a lot of sense. So we're like, let's try and, we know folks are so over capacity, we can do our part as state to make sure we're collaborating.
Okay, so I should make sure I attend that. Awesome. Anybody else have any updates for us? And Jessica, I'm glad you're able to join us. There's so much happening at the federal level, and what I did see, obviously the infrastructure bill is passing. Cool. Curious if anybody has insights into what might be available for climate services through it, but I did see a big infusion for BIA tribal resilience, or at least 200 million extra. So to me, that means, potential here for, you know, some resources to kind of help lift efforts like this a little bit further. And I also know that the Build Back Better bill is in play, expected to see the light of day next week. I think folks anticipate it being passed. I'm not sure what will be in or out, but from everything I hear, that's probably got the greatest potential for climate investments at the federal level. So I'm not entirely sure what that means for climate services and data and things like that, or even tribes. But if anybody has any other insights, I'd be happy to hear them. All right, anybody else have updates before we kind of just dive into our conversation? Okay. All right, and hi, Mead, I'm glad you're here. All right, so for folks that joined a little bit later, slightly different meeting today. So we are not featuring a solution provider as we have been. We are just gonna chat. We're gonna get our minds around what we know so far. So I don't know, 4 different tools, but there are hundreds. And I've been going back and forth with myself. I don't want to taint you with what I know about gaps. I want to do some listening, and then I want to do some sharing. So basically, we want to try to pinpoint areas that we don't feel like enough information is available to tribes to help them as they get through the process of identifying and addressing their vulnerabilities. And so I've been at this for a while, and I know kind of where I think the gaps are. I want to hear from you what you think the priority gaps are, and then maybe we will know something. You know, we each might come at this from a different perspective. Hey, actually, there is some data here. It's over here. Great. Then it's not exactly a gap. We've sort of filled it. Or maybe it's a true gap where there's not even raw data to work with, or there's data, but it's very limited. It's like 1 year of data, big deal. So, you know, this is what I've showed before about what we have learned at the Tribal Climate Health Project about generally the problems with data. And so sometimes it's missing completely or only available in scholarly articles. The data is often not location specific enough. Kind of like that example I just gave, UN data at the national level. All right, cool, better than nothing, not as helpful as I need to tell me whether or not you know, the Yurok tribe is going to have a food security problem, right? Data is often missing timescales and projections. So we've talked about this plenty of times. Lots of tools are really good at giving sort of a baseline. Some of them give historical data, and if it's an exposure, if it's exposure information like heat or precipitation, there's usually some pretty good projections available, but there's often not a lot of projections when it comes down to impacts. And then data is not episodic or easily attributable to climate change. And so we can talk more about that, but you know, we know wildfires are a problem. It's hard for me when I do a vulnerability assessment for a tribe to tell them how many more respiratory illnesses will occur based on the projected increase in wildfires. I just can tell them, oh, here's the trend of annual PM 2.5. All right, is that climate change? Is that something else? It's hard to say. So that's just getting us warmed up to be thinking about this, but I do want to get more specific. And so this link, and I'll actually drop it in the chat, can be our worksheet. Let me get myself there. Hang on. Chronically, too many things open, but let me get myself there. Second, I'm already. Just gonna get out of here. Okay. Chatting up. Okay, so you can open that yourself. I'm gonna open it up on my screen as well. All right, it'll open up to the main page, but then we have these tabs down here where we've been trying to take inventory of what we know. And we've sort of, based on the objectives of what we're trying to do together, we've been collecting information. So last time we talked a little bit about agencies and allies, which was just like, who's doing this work? Who do we need to partner with? Is somebody already doing this exact thing we're doing? And sort of assumed, not really. So now we're moving into data gaps, and I've sort of been trying to capture things as we go along about when we talk through solutions, like where the gaps are. And some of you have plugged in a few as well. And I want to give a moment, I think I want to give like 3 minutes of quiet time for you all to kind of look at this and just look at how this is organized and start just dropping in. It can be high level. It doesn't have, you don't have to get too specific. If it's just like, I think there's not enough information about food security, whatever, just say that. If you know something specific, like I really need this indicator or metric and I can't find it anywhere, then drop it here. Put your name by it just so we know who added it. If you do know a data source, you can drop it here. And then we'll talk through where are the gaps. You know, if there is, for example, if there is a data source already, maybe it's not complete, right? So maybe it's got everything at a national scale. Maybe it's got everything, it has no projections, you know, those kinds of, maybe it doesn't provide any interesting displays. It's all in like a very raw data form. So, okay, 3 minutes of actual quiet time. I'm going to bring us back at 11:20 PT. All right, deep thoughts for about another minute, then we'll come back together and chat. back together. Thanks for stopping to think about that. And I want to invite folks that threw some stuff in here just to tell us a little bit about why they think it's a gap, what they know about it, why it's important. Samu, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I was just thinking about some of these topics that are on here and what different measures there could be to look at them. And one thing I was thinking about was how many schools have, or I guess some schools have improved their HVAC systems during COVID, and it seems like a really good opportunity to track, the status of their different filtration systems for wildfire smoke. I also added some extreme heat started to add some extreme heat considerations a little bit lower down. I'm certainly not an expert on it, but my department got kind of blasted in the LA Times about extreme heat and not tracking mortalities attributable to extreme heat events. So I think it's something which we're hoping to put more attention towards. And I think also access to household air conditioning is something that is, I believe, that ACS and American Housing Survey has tracked in the past. So potentially maybe when the 2020 results come out, there might be an opportunity to look at access to air conditioning.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
I do know some sources that I can point you to, but we can talk about whether or not those are adequate. Okay, thank you for that. And Jessica, you added one here. Do you want to go?
Can you hear me all right?
I can't hear you. I did see you tried to unmute. Uh-oh. Technical difficulties. She says, okay, 1 sec. Mead, I think I actually threw you in here, but I think this came up during your presentation, change in geographic range or abundance. Maybe you added that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I apologize, there's gonna be a lot of background noise. I have roofers upstairs right now. So yeah, and the work that I've done with tribes in the Northwest, that has always come up as, like, often when we determine or when we work with tribes to determine how we can best support their data needs, we start by asking about the impacts of concern, not the sort of data, that folks want, but like, what is the impact? And in surveys and discussions, changes in culturally important species always comes up first. And that may be because I work mostly natural resources, I don't know, but that's what comes up first. And so that is also, like, we are able to provide a lot of the data that would affect species, like culturally important species, changes in stream temperature for salmon, like that kind of thing. But there's no readily available data source for, like spatial data of species ranges and how those might change across tribes, traditional areas or reservations. There's a lot of really good reasons why that is the case. I mean, some of it is that there hasn't been really a synthesis of that at a level that would be useful to tribes. Like, there's a lot of individual scientific studies looking at changes in species ranges that are all done in different ways with a lot of different kinds of uncertainties. But the other thing is it's the traditionally important species themselves that are often really understudied. And so even if we do have maps out there of how we think species ranges may change, it's almost never of like roots or the kinds of things that the kinds of species that are important to tribes. It's often like economically important species, which may still be important. There is some overlap, but there's often a lot of difference. And so yeah, and then there's, if you want to actually get it at the level of resolution that might be most useful to tribes. And there's issues of sensitive information, do we how do you even have something at that level that might show where really important berry patches are, or things like that, that we don't want people seeing outside of tribes. And so how do you develop a tool like that? Anyway, that's a much longer discussion, but it's something that we've come up against so many times, and not in falling short and not being able to provide that.
Yeah, I've been planning end of that, trying to figure it out for a tribe, and it's very manual. It's there's no standard database of what every tribe feels like is culturally important, right? So that information has to come from the tribe. What does the tribe consider culturally important species? And that's fine. Like, that should be done on an individual basis. But then there's then you have to do a reconciliation between what the tribe considers culturally important versus what information is available. And usually that's coded by like threatened or endangered species, if anything, right? Lori, go ahead.
Maybe we could have Teresa Romero come and talk about how she's dealt with this for the Shumash, because they've done a really cool private survey, but that was helpful to their tribe of species. Just an idea.
I think she's in this group, and hopefully that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I have what I use. I'll share with you guys. But again, it's hard to use. There's I think it's California Wildlife. What is the agency? State Folk, Fish and Wildlife, I think. Department has some really good databases like BIOS and ACES that are very good about spatial level data. A lot of different metrics. So it's a nice tool, and I'll show that to you guys, but it's only California, so that's not helping everybody.
Yeah, and I might be clear that usually in the course of doing, when we do vulnerability assessments, when we support tribes in that work, like that is often what we are doing, is asking what the impacts are on species and ecosystems, but it means that we're manually working with folks to look at exposure and sensitivity and adaptive capacity. And I guess what I'm trying to get at here is like, there's, to some degree, that has to be done, manually. It has to be done tribe by tribe, but it would be great if some of the inputs that drive sensitivity, for example, were available at a broader scale. So it was so every tribe didn't have to make that investment if they want the Western science inputs there, that stuff is more easily available, and then they can use it however they want.
Like what? Could you give an example of like what we meant by the sensitivity information?
Yeah, so usually if you're measuring, if you want to know the impact on a culturally important species, and if you want to incorporate Western science into that, usually how Western science evaluates impacts on species is looking at its exposure to climate change, which is like changes in anything that is going to, like temperature, precipitation, like anything that's going to affect the species will be exposed to. But then it can have a lot of exposure and it won't matter if it's not sensitive. And so the sensitivities are driven by things like how mobile is it, how frequently does it reproduce, things like that. Like they're physiological things and demographic things that drive how it'll respond to that change. And so that information, you only have to do some kind of like lit review for every species to get it. So it'd be nice if there was some kind of central place for all of that Western science to be collated. And then specifically around things important to tribes, because often when that information is available, again, it's not for some of the first foods that are typically understudied from a Western science perspective.
Has anybody heard of NatureServe? And I'm not even sure I'm getting that right, but that is a very complicated Excel tool that is look at adaptation from on natural resources, or trying to look at vulnerability on natural resources. Jessica's some thumbs up. Can you tell us more? Uh-oh. heard so.
Sorry, say that again.
Try again. Darn. Jessica knows a lot about this stuff. Darn. Has anybody else heard of NatureServe?
Yeah. So I've used their tool a number of times. It's called the Climate Change Vulnerability Index, the Ccbi, and that's NatureServe's like index. You know, it's an Excel-based tool that you can use to measure species vulnerability to climate change. But you have to enter locally specific climate exposure information, and you have to enter all of the sensitivity information, which means you have to, like, there's a really, really clear guide for how you score species. And this is what I mean by manual, right? Like you have to manually go through and look up in the literature all of these things to help you score that species. And we've done this with tribes, and typically we'll do the Western Lit review, and then we'll work with natural resources staff or community members to adjust those scores based on their local and Indigenous knowledge. And it's like an iterative process, but it's just a huge lift. And if tribes had that sensitivity information available already, you know, pre-populated, it would save a lot of time, because then they could just use their local and traditional knowledge to adjust. And they, you know, I'm always trying to get like groups like mine out of the picture. Like we just make that data available, and the tribes can, you know, go forward with their work, and they don't have to go through that.
That's right. That's like our whole goal, is that every tribe does not need to reinvent this wheel for themselves.
This is Nikki. We've used NatureServe in some of our courses, and it's very specific, and it's time consuming for people to learn how to use it. And we've had speakers on it, and you know, come in and talk about NatureServe, but it takes a while. It's what do you call it? It's got a learning curve and whatnot. So I
agree. I've dove into it, and I'm somebody who's not afraid of Excel and a lot of information, and I almost blacked out. I mean, it was
right.
complicated. Like I would have to send a contract out, because I'm not an ecologist. I'm not a natural biologist. You know, I feel like you need that level of expertise to be able to use it.
Well, but the thing that I will say is that the sensitivity stuff, like, again, that's inherent to a species. I mean, it might differ depending on like locally specific populations, things like that, but like a lot of that doesn't change, you know, depending where you are. So like if that could just be filled out, it would save a lot of time. But I agree, it's a pretty gnarly tool. Like it's not super user friendly.
Yeah, but you know, it matters from our conversations with tribes, because they, you know, oftentimes tribes will feel like their overall well-being does depend upon the presence of their culturally important species. So for us, it's been related to health, you know, cultural and spiritual health. So, but we haven't tackled it yet. Let me show you though what we point to in our EZ tool. And I did drop the link to the EZ tool in the chat box in case you wanted it to be downloading. This is actually sort of a kind of an updated version that we're using in practice right now, and trying to fill in more gaps. So let me see. So, and for those that haven't seen this monstrosity, it's a giant Excel tool where we basically mined all the information we could find about where data lives for all the various vulnerabilities that tribes might be considering. Right, so here we have, this is a possible impact, decline or disappearance of some culturally important plants or animals. So, you know, there's possible metrics that we'd be looking at, like production rates of specific culturally important species. And I'm trying to figure out, because I do point to California. I'm freezing. There's a technology problem today. Not responding. Okay, he wants to die. That's not good. Yeah, I got to reopen that. Jessica, were you able to get yourself unmuted while I reopen?
I don't know. You tell me.
Oh, I hear you quiet as a little mouse.
Okay. Any better?
Right, I'm not the only one. I just hear a tiny little voice. Try again.
How about now? Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes. Hey.
Little wins.
Yeah.
I just got the end of what Mead was saying, and about NatureServe, and I agree with everything she just said. I find it a bit hard to use. I've also used IBAT, which I just put in the chat. It's global in coverage, but it is specifically supposed to be about biodiversity and primarily endangered and threatened species. It brings together a number of different databases and has some really high-powered partners that kind of fund it and maintain it. So there's probably at least some potentially good information in there. I think you might not be able to get down to the geographic level that you want. I know that you can get down to the country level. I don't know if you can get down to the regional level or how specific you can get down to.
Yeah. So, there's a bunch of natural resource indicators or metrics that I have listed here, but here's one. So Cdfw, California Department of Fish and Wildlife. This is the BIOS tool. I'm just going to bring it up. If you're not from California, you would have never bothered to look at it. It's the best thing I've found. If you're just not if you're not going to go calculating raw data. But the problem is there's a billion data sets in here. Some of them though, and I haven't been in here for a while, are pretty good. Let's see. Natural resources. Yeah, they do have some information about vulnerable species. And then here, at least there's this, you can code it by natural or Native American Indian reservations. But I'm going to look this up. So okay, terrestrial climate vulnerable species. So that's actually connects to this other database called ACES. Give a little summary. And then you can, I don't know, complete metadata. I don't know. You can actually map it. It's been a while since I've been in here. I don't want to download the data. I just want to see it. Go. Sorry, this isn't fun to do live, but normally it would populate on a map, which is kind of cool. So I don't know. I don't remember how it really works. I have to figure it out. But at least there's something. There's vulnerable species. I think it does talk about like climate sensitive species. Maybe not. Maybe sensitivity is the right word.
In the best of all possible worlds, this would show the cascade, because what we do in Western science, sadly, is just look at the individual species. And so we miss the big picture of, yeah, the kangaroo rat's gone, and that's going to impact these avian species and these other terrestrial species. We wait and see that individual species problem.
Okay, yeah.
If anybody's listening and wants to create a perfect tool.
Well, so Lori, like you look at this stuff for your climate indicators, right? I mean, you're looking at natural resource information.
Yeah, we are.
Who do you go to for that?
We are right now just going to the tribes. We're not for the tribes we've worked with, we've offered to, do you want us to do a search on this database or that? But what we're repeatedly hearing is all of these species are culturally important. I mean, I think that that's the thing that for somebody like me, you know, I'm your basic colonizer. I think like you're going to tell me red-winged blackbird, but it's not just the red-winged blackbird. It's all the birds. It's all our relatives that are important. And for me to continue to try to tease out some that are important and some that are not is not appropriate for what we're doing.
I have had success having tribes really illuminate the ones that they would classify as particularly culturally important. And sometimes it's connected to food, or at least traditional foods. They may not still use it,
Yeah.
but you know, they're making wee wash out of acorns, so the oak trees are considered culturally important.
Exactly. And I mean, and we are having some, but I'm really going out of my way not to, I mean, to listen to what I'm told. And so if a tribe tells me that all the species are culturally important, that's the end of it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
For other groups, I mean, we've learned a lot that, and it's the interesting thing is, as we talk to tribes, like with the Karuk, and I do have permission to share this, they have, I believe it's 27 indicator species that they've used since time immemorial. And as they have used these species as an indicator of environmental health, you know, and so those are species that we've focused on with our work with Karuk, and we're not saying that the other species are unimportant.
Right. Hi Walker, welcome. We're just chatting about data gaps, and we're talking about natural resources and culturally important species. What do you all think about which agency? So if this were to be done at a national scale, national wild, no, what is it? What's the federal agency for wildlife? And
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So it would be under Department of Interior probably, and probably U.S. Fish and Wildlife, perhaps USGS would be involved as well, Geological Survey.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, you know, obviously this is a gap. We all agree. It would be nice, while there is a data sovereignty problem and a sensitivity problem with this, we sort of agree that it would be helpful if every tribe did not have to go look, calculating sensitivities for all the species. Okay. So that's on our list. It's a big one. I also want to walk through a couple that Asamo mentioned, and I keep saying your name wrong, I'm sorry. Let's go back to the list. So some of these, like household air conditioning, and some of them are more like adaptive capacity, and some of them are pretty available from what I can tell. Not this one. I don't know at all about this one, but let's look up, what I know about household air conditioning. And actually it would be here. So on our tab, it would be under a population or adaptive capacity measure. So we have households with air conditioning, and I don't have a good national level data source for it, right? This is our national database or data sources. This one's California. But I do go to HPI, so that's Healthy Places Index. But this is awesome. We should probably invite somebody to talk about this one because it's so good.
Yeah, that's really useful. I don't know if people have access to some of the Esri data, but they do work with tribal entities and nonprofits and stuff to grant access. So they would have information on like housing with air conditioning, whether it's central air or individual units and stuff like that. They have a lot of data. People are interested.
They do. Let's see. So look, here they have a whole section on climate change adaptive capacity, and here's air conditioning. So you can view this on the map.
Yep.
And it's just so good. And you know, this is the one that goes by, I think it's grid level data, right? So it gets down kind of small. You're not going to get a tribal boundary out of it, but you can kind of see color coding about who's got air conditioning and who doesn't. It's not really surprising, right? Green.
But if you look at the actual Esri data, it goes down to the census block or census tract. And they do have, I mean, you can pull up tribal boundaries if desired.
Yeah. Okay. And Esri is, yeah, it's an somewhat expensive service, right? And you have to have people who know how to use it.
It depends. There are some uses of it that are actually very easy to use. Some is made publicly available and forward facing. And they do offer lower, it's much less, it's cheaper to, so we get their data at the county level, you know, and below for a much reduced cost. I don't know if so individual tribes could probably get quite a bit. And even if you just outright were to, which we have done many times, to buy a data set, that's a lot cheaper to just get it as a, yeah, because we get them as a shapefile or a CSV file, and you can just go ahead and use it at a small level. You know, it's one thing if you're going to say, I want the all national, but if you do want something, and it's often very, very inexpensive. I can often ask them, why don't you sell your old data? So like, because they're very much, whatever they post, it's the most recent. It's like, well, that, you know, for someone who doesn't have anything, the previous years is pretty useful. You know, if they're on 21 now, I would still find 2020 pretty useful for me from the analytical side. So if someone is interested and works for a tribal government or nonprofit, they have whole programs geared around making those services available at a reduced cost. So I would reach out to them. Ash, yeah.
Do you think that a tribe, like, because you're from a county, would a tribe, say the relationship was decent, be able to go to its county and ask them to run data?
Well, you can certainly do it here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we and me and Chris and the Community Health Statistics Unit were frequently asked to do that kind of stuff. Not necessarily for the tribes, but we could. Yeah, I think a lot might well be willing to do that.
I mean, that's useful. And I wonder if some of the climate hubs and various technical assistants around the country are able to do that too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, you know, the bummer here, just for my tool, is like linking to the specific indicator I want to point people to isn't possible. They don't have like a unique URL to point me directly to air conditioning. So it's kind of a bummer. So it's a little hunt and peck, but a lot of good stuff is here on adaptive capacity, at least. So it's one option. Let me ask you all to another question. Going back to this. So I have a million questions when it comes to data gaps. I have a huge wish list. It's basically my easy tool. Anything in the easy tool that doesn't have a data source attached to it is a data gap for me. It doesn't mean all of them are the most important, but I just kind of highlighted a couple of areas like mental health and food security. CDC has actually taken a big interest. So after we had that last call, Claudia contacted me, and I know they're interested in building out their data sets, the CDPH, or the National Environmental Public Health Tracking Network tool, building out their mental health indicators. So, you know, I'm just pointing out what I know, and here's what we have in our tool. Lots of different ways to look at mental health. I think it's pretty good, but the problem is for most of them, you know, if some of them, this is HPI again, so it's California only. This is Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which has a lot of really good information, but it's all at a county level. It's like demographic, it's everything, but there's some health information here. It's cool. So here's something you can get: violent crime, which violent crime could, is a potential impact associated with like extreme heat, among other exposures. And then a lot of these we're getting directly from the Tribal Epidemiology Center, which requires a data request, and they have special authorization to mine a bunch of other, raw data sets. But it's, it's an extra step. It doesn't necessarily come well visualized, but it's some good stuff. This would be a good blueprint for anybody who really wanted to build out a good mental health tool. Does anybody else have anything on mental health? Like any places that you go for information on mental health? And, we're looking at trends that we know might be associated with a climate exposure. Okay. And then how about food security? Has anybody looked into food security? This one I feel like is depressing because there are a lot of ways you can look at it. It's just nothing is really available that's that location specific. So, it'd be really great. I don't know, like per capita food supply variability. I don't know. Food insecurity rates by county. That's the best one I could find. And that's from a data set called Map the Meal. Robert Wood Johnson Foundation does have some decent metrics, but always down to a county level. This one would be awesome. How many households in within a tribal boundary identify as food insecure? And it would be telling to be tracking this on an annual basis for over 20 years. How is that changing? Are tribes becoming more food insecure over time due to, there's going to be an attribution issue, but assuming climate change is a factor.
Angie, I wonder in the food security that we could include, I don't know how much information they may have, but like the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance. They do not a lot of advocacy and education, but they may have a lot of data, and that's something that we could find out. And under them is like the
That's a great idea.
Indigenous Seed Keepers Network.
Okay, wait, what was the first organization you mentioned?
Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance.
Okay, and then they have a program underneath them, you saying?
Yeah, a subgroup is the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network. And then one more after that.
Okay.
There is in Tucson, there's the Native Seeds? Yeah. These organizations have been around forever that could provide that could potentially provide data.
Yeah, right. They can point us to if there's anything that's what we consider community ready, right? So yeah, we're trying our best to avoid having to go pour through articles and things, just find what's ever been aggregated. But that's helpful. Thank you. They would know.
Yeah, and thanks to Osamo for agreeing with me. But he has a good comment in the chat box that he said he's willing to look into it. That'd be great. Oh wait, yeah, okay.
Great. Anybody else on food sovereignty or food security come across anything good?
I was thinking the USDA might have some. They do a lot of blogging about, and their agricultural economic research arm does a lot of research and projects in those areas, of which some of them are related to tribal, like culturally sensitive foods. They put out a memo on which ones would go into the subsidized meal plans and offerings in schools and so forth. They also have a number of, I guess you could say, data portals. They're the ones that have the food desert one, although that one is not my personal favorite, but they keep up to it, up with it as well, because I think it's not the best tool. But they do have a series of new climate hub dashboards, which might be
Yeah,
USDA here. There's one.
right.
And they have a big food. What do they call it? It's food. It's like Food Central, I think is the name of it. I went on that just trying to look at the data, but the site is actually down right at the moment, so I couldn't access their actual web map to see what might be in it.
Yeah.
But you might want to check that one out. Maybe I can find that.
So that's what you would use. I don't know if food security has come up for you guys at the County of San Diego.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Chris might want to comment on that one, but yeah, that's one of our Live Well San Diego.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do these metrics sound like what you would be tracking, or like what else would you be tracking?
Well, of course, ours would only be at the, for local level.
Yeah.
Chris, can you think of anything off the top of my head? I mean, food security, there's a lot of health ones, including mental health.
Yeah, we utilize the CHIS survey quite a bit.
Yes,
so
CHIS and
California,
Burfus.
Yeah, and the Burfus survey for some of those. And the issue always is though with the CHIS survey, the California Health Survey, it's sometimes some of those questions, like some of the ones people were tracking, in terms of, I know several external partners of ours were using that fast food. They were using a fast food question to see in our the smaller areas of our county, like in our regional areas of the county, like who is eating, the percentage of people that were eating fast food, and they just said we're not going to carry that question anymore because some of these questions were they all have to be paid for essentially, like UCLA will collect the money to carry the variable on the survey. And so that fast food question went away, but I know they still, they'll look at the fruit and vegetable questions, like how many fruits or vegetables are you eating daily, like in your diet, like are you eating, I think it's like 3 to 6 servings of fruit vegetables per day. Those kind of questions, they utilize those. And some of the ones that we've already sort of covered, but it's definitely one of those ones that we wish we had more data, like the food security data. We wish we had more, especially at the local level.
I have one more question, then we'll probably have to wrap up, but those surveys are so good. And oftentimes I feel like it requires a whole bunch of analysis and you have to go do a data request for it. But I'm like, is anybody working on taking those surveys and making a database out of them that's publicly accessible and already scrubbed so that privacy problems aren't a problem?
We're in the process of putting some of these up as Tableau dashboards on our community health statistics site. So there'll be, the San Diego County data for those will be readily available on our site for some of these questions.
I feel like that's a CDPH.
Yeah, CDPH has, their data portal as well.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you guys at CDPH, do you know what's there?
Sorry, I lost track of the topic.
We're talking about like the CHIS survey. What was the other one? There's some of these big surveys where there's great data, but you have to do a data request unless somebody's thrown it in a tool and aggregated it and scrubbed it for privacy and confidentiality concerns. So we just wondering, we think CDPH maybe have done that already, at least for California, and we're just wondering if you knew.
I don't know, but I can look into it.
Yeah, with Burfus, with the behavioral risk factor survey, we typically work with Cal State Sacramento. They're usually the ones who provide the data to us, like the California portion of the survey for the Burfus.
Indian Health Services also did a Burfus tribal survey for California.
Totally.
But
yeah, CTech is where we would go for that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it still requires a data request, which is not ideal, but better than nothing. But maybe something we add, actually, that's a really good point, to add the food security stuff to what the data request protocol that we built for CTEC. Okay, so I'm going to wrap us up, but man, I mean, we could do this for days, right? But this is like the nuts and bolts, and I'm really glad we're getting down to some of this level of information. I'm going to process this a little bit more, but keep thinking about this. Let's continue this conversation. We're going to flesh out this data gap problem and try to come up with some themes around where we think the biggest bang for the buck can be in terms of our efforts to try to address gaps. Okay, our next meeting is with NOAA Digital Coast. They're going to present their tools. So we will see you then. And thanks so much for all your brain power.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye, all.
Angie.
Thank you.